Hi! Some time ago, there was a lot of noise around Vite. Articles, tweets, Telegram channels constantly shouted about a revolution. Create React app is no longer needed, everyone should switch to Vite. I was extremely skeptical of these news and decided to investigate whether it is really good enough to deserve all the hype. And of course, I tried migrating my working project from React scripts to Vite, and you will see the results of this migration in this video. Let's start with what Vite is and why there is so much buzz about it. The documentation tells us the following. Vite is a build tool that aims to provide a faster and leaner development experience for modern web projects. It's not immediately obvious where and what exactly Vite can speed up, so I decided to read the Why Vite section. It is not uncommon for large-scale projects to contain thousands of modules. We are starting to hit a performance bottleneck for JavaScript-based tooling. It can often take an unreasonably long wait, sometimes up to minutes, to spin up a dev server, and even with hot module replacement, file edits can take a couple of seconds to be reflected in the browser. What is being said here is that if you have a huge project and it continues to grow, and the tools written in JavaScript, such as Webpack, Rollup, and others, start to launch more slowly with each new line of code, and hot reload also becomes slower. To confirm or refute this, I decided to compare how quickly Create React App starts from scratch and how quickly my current project with a bunch of files starts after years of development. It turns out that with a clean code base, the application starts in about 3-5 seconds, and in my current project, it starts in about 9 seconds. It is clear that benchmarks are dubious, but they show a general trend. That is, it is indeed true that the more files there are, the longer it takes for the application to start, and I suspect the same is true for hot reload. Although the problem seems not particularly critical, it is still interesting to see how Vite solves this problem. The documentation states that Vite splits all the code into two parts. The first part is the dependencies, in other words, our NPM packages that we install in the project, and the second part is the code that we write within the project's development framework, and it accelerated both of these parts in its own way. Usually, we build all dependencies and the entire project using Webpack, but Vite decided to use a new tool called sbuild, specifically for building dependencies. The peculiarity of this tool is that it is written in Go. As a result, it is faster by 10 to 100 times compared to any bundler written in JavaScript. If you read the README file of the sbuild package, interesting metrics are provided there. Webpack is the slowest bundler in this list. Rollup and Parcel are not much faster than Webpack, but still about 20% faster than Webpack. And sbuild, looking at the numbers, is on a completely different level. This is over 100 times faster than Webpack. It is unclear how much these metrics can be trusted. It's just some kind of screenshot, but if they were lying so blatantly, they would have been slammed a long time ago. But on the NPM site, we can see the package statistics, and there are about 22 million downloads per week. This indicates that all this is true. This is how Vite accelerated the code related to dependencies. Now let's move on to the second part, namely the code that you and I have coded during our working days. This code consists of JSX, CSS files. With all these files, Vite works as with native ES modules. If you don't know what an ES module is, I'll leave a link to MDN in the description. The main advantage of working with JS files as ES modules is that you don't need to do anything. The browser already has a mechanism for handling ES modules. That is, it already knows how to work with them, and not just work, but work efficiently, which removes part of the important work from us and reduces the time for transpiling files. As a result, the documentation provides the following images. To start a project using Webpack, you need to analyze absolutely all the code in your project, even if you have outsourced something into separate chunks. This fact should also be analyzed, and only after all this analysis, the dev server provides us with a bundle. This means that we can finally see our project in the browser on localhost. On the other hand, with ES modules, everything works differently. The dev server starts immediately, without any analysis. After all, analysis is simply not necessary. All our files are already ES modules, and the browser knows how to work with them. It will load them through HTTP requests. It simply dynamically loads the necessary files as we navigate through the pages. This sounds extremely reasonable. It is likely that this was the idea behind these modules. However, it is not very clear how it copes when it needs to load 500 files at once. After all, it can't just send 500 HTTP requests. Honestly, I don't know the nuances of how ES modules work, but I think everything has long been thought out, since it has been implemented in the browser. But I would like to address a few important things. First, what I described with ES modules is not about the production version of your application. It's only about the development mode, i.e. the dev server. In the production version, the old approach with analysis and a single bundle is used. This is because generating a single bundle is still a more efficient and stable way for users for various reasons. An interesting fact is that the production bundle is not created using SBuild, but with Rollup. The reason is the same. SBuild doesn't yet cover all our needs, so for the sake of convenience and stability, we are still forced to use old proven tools. So, what did we end up with? Vite essentially began using more modern and raw tools under the hood, such as ES modules and SBuild. However, due to their raw nature for production, we still have to stick to the old familiar flow with Rollup and a single bundle. As a result, the number of packages has significantly increased in our yarn lock or package lock file, as we need to install both SBuild and Rollup and something else. The second important thing is the difference between the development environment and the production environment, as the files are built by different tools. But on the other hand, we have achieved a tremendous acceleration in working in the development environment. The project should start up with incredible speed, and we were also promised that the hot reload module will work faster than a bullet. Let's take their word for it in this case. So, these are the results we have after the initial review of the new tool. I think we've covered what Vite represents. Now it remains to test it in practice. After reading various articles, I believe that migrating from Create React App, or more precisely from React scripts to Vite, is quite easy. So, I decided to conduct an experiment and migrate my current project to it. Now I'll share the story of what I encountered during the migration process. The first thing to do is to remove React scripts from your project and install the npm packages Vite and a Vite.js plugin React. Yes, you need to install the React plugin because Vite serves not only React, but also other libraries and frameworks. It has its pros and cons. Next, I replaced the application startup and build commands. Now we should use Vite for all these tasks, which sounds quite logical. The next pleasant thing was that Vite has built-in support for adding a config. Moreover, it's not just a possibility, you are obliged to add it and specify which technologies you will be working with. In our case, of course, it's React. The code is quite simple, so I won't focus on it. The next change was extremely unusual for me. It's extracting the index.html file from the public folder to the project root. Honestly, I got used to that folder and really didn't want to move the index.html file, but these are new rules and we should follow it. Of course, just moving the file is not enough. I had to edit the file a bit. The first important change was to remove the public URL everywhere. I wasn't a big fan of this construction anyway, so I gladly and anxiously removed it, hoping that Vite provided another way to pass public URL for all links. The second change in this file was to explicitly specify the entry point for the application. I really liked this. It's as if there's less magic now. Now the entry point is extremely obvious and is handled not through a bundler, but through the good old HTML file, which seems very transparent. Naturally, the changes don't end there, but for now, the changes still look routine. We need to replace the file extensions from .js to .jsx. Naturally, this is only if JSX is actually being used. This is a mandatory requirement, and there is justification for it from the creator of Vite. And if anyone doesn't know, then the creator of Vite and the Vue framework is the same person, Evan You. In a tweet, he says the following: "The reason Vite requires .jx extension for JSX processing is because in most cases, plain .js files shouldn't need full AST transforms to work in the browser. Allowing JSX in JS files means every served file must be full AST processed just in case it contains JSX. It sounds like a legitimate requirement to distinguish between JS and JSX in order to handle them differently. This will result in significant savings. I found this justification completely satisfactory, especially considering that we were already using file extensions correctly in our project, so I didn't have to change anything. Therefore, we move on to the next point. Create React App has built-in support for absolute paths. You can immediately write the folder name and the subsequent path to the file. Vite does not have this option out of the box. You need to explicitly specify the symbol for the absolute path, for example, ~, and then the rest of the path. Usually I do it this way in my projects, but in our current project, people actively used absolute paths provided out of the box. As a result, I had to migrate about 4,000 places in the project. However, it wasn't very difficult as modern code editors provide the ability for quick global code editing. And within half an hour, I successfully edited everything. Moving on. The default plugin from Create React App for working with SVG was used in our project. It is not included by default in Vite, so I had to additionally install Vite plugin SVGR. Naturally, it needed to be added to the config as well. It was quite simple, and everything worked without having to change the code in the project itself. It seemed like I had followed all the steps according to the instructions. I can proceed to launch the project. So I tried to run the command yarn start and it really responded lightning fast. Just 387 milliseconds and done. It seemed like the server was running and you could open the project on this strange port. I was already thrilled and started to open the page in the browser, but I only saw an empty page with errors in the console. The errors were strange because they were mostly related to NPM packages that had been installed in the project a long time ago. It turned out that process.env is not supported in Vite. The phrase not supported means that the process variable equals undefined. This was a big surprise for me. It turned out that the Vite documentation expected a certain import meta env variable instead of the familiar process env. This is an alternative way to pass environment parameters into the project. For me, this was something completely new, and I didn't even have the desire to figure out why they decided to do it this way. After all, most of my NPM packages use process env, and I specifically needed them to be in a working state. And indeed, people created some workarounds to bypass this issue. According to GitHub issues, the most notable solution seemed to be to install the rollup plugin inject and use it to add the process variable. In my case, at first it seemed like it helped, because I encountered a different error inside another package. A very strange error. It looks like we try to import something that doesn't exist in the package. Most likely it is a package bug, but it didn't manifest itself before because Webpack doesn't use ES modules, and apparently everything works fine without ES modules. And perhaps if I update the package version, they may have already fixed this issue. It seemed like I almost completed solving the issues, but once again I encountered bugs related to process.env. At this point, I decided to give up. After all, the next step for me was to integrate the Module Federation plugin for micro frontends, and I realized that the business definitely would not allow such significant changes to be introduced into our project. There is no so much benefits of such changes. The main benefit is the development mode of your project will launch in 300 milliseconds instead of 9 seconds. Unfortunately, for the business, these are unjustified risks, especially considering that it's unclear what the future holds for Vite, whether it will continue to develop. To sum it all up, I liked the idea of Vite. It sounds extremely interesting, and apparently many people have embraced it. After all, it has over 9.5 million downloads per week. I partially explained this popularity to myself by the fact that Vite became a dependency of Vue, starting from approximately version 3.2. And I will remind you that Vue has over 4 million downloads per week. Probably, if I had a project in Vue, whether I wanted to or not, I would migrate to it, and that would be okay for me, because the creator of Vite and Vue is the same person, and he will strive to solve problems for his framework. But will he solve all the problems for React? I hope so, but at the moment, I definitely wouldn't risk suggesting to my company to switch to Vite. In our case, we have a really huge code base, and if some of the NPM packages stop working, or we will need to rewrite some modules for migration, it will be a big problem, as we have no resources for it. But if we start a new React project, it will be one of the most obvious options for choosing. But I will remind you that this is just my opinion. I'm interested to read your thoughts on this matter, especially those who have already migrated to Vite or started a new project with it. I would be very grateful for any comments. And of course, if you liked the breakdown, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to hit the notification bell. After all, there's no spam on this channel. Bye.